welcome to the Momversation Club, the podcast born out of the idea that every mum needs a tribe. I'm Claire Strong.
And I'm Christina Struckmeyer. We're two moms just like you, navigating the chaotic, challenging, and often isolating world of motherhood.
It's said that it takes a village to raise a child, but we want to know, where the F is that village?
It's a question that resonates with so many of us who find ourselves raising children, managing careers, and trying to maintain our own identities, often with a sense of isolation.
But we're here to remind you that you're not alone. The Momversation Club is your village, a place where you feel valued, appreciated, and understood.
We believe that by sharing our own experiences, successes, and struggles, we can create a virtual village for all you amazing mamas out there.
So join us every week for an honest, raw, and relatable discussion about all aspects of being a mum, including the stuff that you just can't talk about with anyone else.
So if you've ever asked yourself where the F is the village, then you've found your tribe. So let's get into it.
Hi, Christina.
Good morning, Claire.
How's it going?
Oh man, well, I wish there was some sort of way to show the behind the scenes. Maybe we will, of you and I and our morning so far. Claire and I have accidentally over-caffeinated and under-consumed breakfast, and we're a little wonky.
We're a little wild this morning. So for the record, I've had 2 teas. So I have, because I'm from England, I live on tea. So I've had 2 cups of Yorkshire tea. So it's really strong tea with milk. And then I had a protein bar at 7 a.m. It's now 12:09. We're just recording episode 2 of the day. And so listen, no one can, knock our commitment to the cause. We are hardcore.
We're committed.
We are, working through the shakes and all of it. So it'll be interesting to see how this episode goes, frankly.
Yeah, maybe we don't air it if it's not great. So if you're hearing this, it went great.
Yeah, it passed the bar. Maybe just, but it passed anyway.
You know what? It's kind of great, Claire, that we're starting the episode wonky, because the topic today is about unique situations and sometimes
perfect. And in fact, more than that, this is legit real life for us. We try and hold our you-know-what together usually on episodes, but today we're just letting it all out.
This is who we are. This is the real us.
This is the real Claire and Christina, ladies.
Oh my gosh. Well, so today we're talking about a little bit of neurodiversity, which covers an umbrella of terms of different types of development and things like that. And the amount of, not the amount of, well, Claire, help me. I'm like having a caffeine situation. What are we talking about today?
So we are talking about navigating day-to-day life with 2 of our children who are on the spectrum in some way. And so in my case, so it's my teenager, and she has ADHD. And in your case, Christina, it's your 8-year-old, and she has...
Oh yeah, my almost 9-year-old, and by the time this airs, she'll be 9.
So 9-year-old. My gosh, she's
almost 9. Yeah. But she has autism, and so we are going to share a little bit about how we came to discover that as parents. Which I think, if you have a child that has any sort of developmental types of differences, you'll relate, or at least kind of acknowledge that that's very similar to you. And then also how it affects our day-to-day as mothers, and like what that looks like in practice, and like what that looks like day-to-day.
Yeah. So why don't you kick off, Christina, and so first of all, take me back to the beginning. When did you know that maybe something was a little off with Stella?
Yeah. So Stella is my first child. And so as an oldest of 4, I kind of knew what kids were like, but it's my first baby. So like a lot of moms, I'm just making stuff up as I go, and I don't really know how this is supposed to look or any of that stuff. And so Stella had some unique behavior patterns from a really young age that I did not realize were different than other kids. And when she was probably about a year old, we started attending a bunch of mommy and me type activities in our local town. We did like play dates on this day and like library story time on this day. And then there was a special First 5 sponsored play group on Friday mornings at the school that was nearby our house. And First Five, for those unfamiliar, is a regional, like 0 to 5 focused nonprofit organization, and
Okay.
they do a lot of education on children 0 to 5 and their development. And so lots of
Yeah.
like sing to your kid, read to your kid, be nice to your kid.
Yeah.
And so
Here's how to be a good mom. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I went to the play group and then they started offering free like parenting help, like where they would come to your house and like teach you lessons to give to your kid and like start preparing them for preschool. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought, wow, that's awesome. Like, yeah, I would love that. Free help for sure.
Yeah.
So we had this gal come to our house and she started asking questions like, does Stella normally do things like that? And, the behavior in question is her running back and forth wall to wall in her room for like
Mm.
25-30 minutes.
Wow.
Or like, does Stella normally have a very specific tower that she wants to build with her mega blocks that
Yes.
cannot be touched and needs to be
Yes.
exactly this way every day? And the answer was, yeah, that's pretty normal. Like, why do you ask? So
Yeah.
she started kind of gently suggesting, like, hey, I'm noticing some development stuff that's a little off of where it should be, and it might be a good idea to get her assessed. And I
Mhm.
originally was like, how dare you? Like, she's fine. You're being ridiculous. But also, part of me said, you know what? I'm going to prove her wrong and show that she's fine. Like, I'm going to have them come
Mm.
in and tell me she's fine. So they came in and they determined that she had a developmental delay. They didn't call it autism at first. They just said
Mm.
developmental delay. And that was around the time she was 2 was when we started
Mhm.
doing that. So about a year of the observation from that gal and then the handoff.
Mhm.
So we started getting early intervention for that developmental delay, which looked like a lady coming to our house and playing with my kid and like taking
Mhm.
notes. We started having a speech gal come, doing stuff with her, taking notes. And it came up that, we might have her tested for autism because there's a
Mm.
lot of things coming up that show early signs of autism. And I'm like, she's 2. Like, you guys are being really a lot. And so I ended up kind of following my gut and getting her early diagnosed a little bit before her 3rd birthday. And lo and behold, they were like, absolutely. Yeah, that's what's going on here. Your
Wow.
child has autism. And we started receiving care for her. And as we have gone from like 3 to almost 9 now,
Mhm.
she's had ongoing intervention with that. And,
Mm.
in the beginning, it looked like basically she was nonverbal until
Mm.
probably about 4 or 5. And then when it did come in, it was very, very, very behind of what it should have been.
Mhm.
Like toddler level speak at like age
Mhm.
5 or 6.
Yeah.
And it's progressed with intervention over the course of these last many years, to a place where we are able to have a conversation that maybe you might hold with like a 3-year-old child.
Oh.
So and it's got its own stuff, like, and it's
Mhm.
changed so much over the years, which I imagine, as you talk about your stuff, like
Yeah.
where it started versus where it's at, massive difference. So talk a little bit about your situation with your daughter and kind of when did you notice that there was something going on there?
So it's interesting you mentioned the towers and stuff that Stella used to build when she was younger, because she used to do that too.
Yeah.
Um, but it was mainly, so she's a very, very social girl. She loves making friends. She's just a real people's person. And so when I'd questioned whether there was any kind of issue before, when she was at primary school or elementary school, as you call it here, the teachers had always said absolutely not, because her social skills are actually way above where they should be at her age. But
Hmm.
she always struggled with, things like math, and but I just put it down to her being very creative, because she has a very creative brain. So fast forward to middle school here in the States, and COVID had hit as well. So she unfortunately did a lot of middle school online on Zoom, which really badly impacted her. Um, but there's just certain things that she struggles with, and they were becoming more apparent. So, for example, when she's in a classroom, although her hearing's fine, she has hearing tests all the time. There's nothing wrong with the hearing, but she can't process what the teacher's saying in the same way that maybe another kid would. So so she needed to be right at the front of the classroom to have a shot at actually processing the information. Um, and so, and she was just, as school was getting harder, she started just struggling more and more, particularly in that environment. The other thing that was going on at home um, is that she just finds, things that other people find easy and normal difficult. So getting to school on time is a massive thing that we deal with every single day. She's now in high school, but it's that executive functioning side of her brain that just doesn't fire in the same way that it does for a lot of people. So long story short, her high school, which I've got to say I'm so grateful for, she has a wonderful team of supporters at that high school. She has an IEP in place now, which is an individual education program, I believe.
Plan, but
Um,
very close, Claire.
a
Good job.
plan. Okay. Well, I just
Individualized
upgraded it
education plan. Yeah.
program.
So
um,
basically, for those listeners who aren't familiar, like
mhm,
an IEP is a tool that you can use at school where
mhm,
certain interventions that might help your child move forward in their learning are implemented. And you have a meeting once a year as like a collective of teachers and
yep,
interventionists and parents. And you discuss like what's going well, what are some goals we have for the year of her education, and vice versa, like all the things.
yeah.
So for those unfamiliar, it's like it's a special paper that we have with our kids.
It is. And so the reason why I'm bringing this up at this point in our talk today, Christina, is because it was then that she was diagnosed, basically, because as part of that, they need to establish, why they would be giving her those extra resources. And so that made sense. So she has an ADHD diagnosis. I know ADHD is very different for everybody. Um, with her, it's not that she's, crazy hyper or unruly, and a distraction in class. None of those things. It's the executive functioning part of ADHD that she struggles with. So, like I say, it's the organization, it's the getting assignments turned in on time because now she's in high school. That's a big part, and she's very bright. She's clever, so it's not even that she has a lower IQ. She doesn't at all. But sometimes her grades will suffer because she hasn't turned her work in, and the reason why she hasn't turned her work in is because she's overwhelmed and she doesn't know where to start with it. And so that makes for a very challenging day to day situation often
Yeah.
in my house, because whereas my other daughter doesn't have the same challenges in that sense, I can get her off to school no problem. Whereas her older sister, because of the things we're chatting about now, it's a real challenge. I mean, if I can get her to school, that's I tick off that. And if she's at school anywhere near on time, that's another tick. And then if
Gold
she
star.
stays, and then if she stays at school for the day, that's another. So we're this is how ADHD presents itself in our house on a day to day basis.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that also, leads to low self-esteem, anxiety, depression, because she thinks she's not as smart as the other kids. Because why has she got this plan in place? Why can't she process information like her friends? And so we're at a stage right now where we found a great therapist that she absolutely loves, so that's fantastic. But I would like her to get to a place where she is accepting of herself. And I was hoping that the diagnosis would almost kind of take some pressure off her in her own mind, because it's like, oh, I'm not weird. I'm not, oh, now I can see why. And there are a
Yeah,
lot.
there's like something to point to and say this is the thing.
Yeah, yeah, rather than I'm just stupid or whatever.
Yeah.
And so that's where we're at. I mean, it's definitely a journey. It's very stressful at times. It's very challenging. And I know that everyone's journey with this is different. So yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, how does
Well,
that? I mean,
Well, I was
you
gonna
go
say,
ahead,
getting
Tom. Yeah,
back to the diagnosis piece, right?
yeah, yeah.
You have such a unique situation because your diagnosis for her was at an age where she can understand what's happening.
Yes.
She, I
Yeah.
imagine, knows what she's being tested for,
Yeah.
which is very different than my experience. What was her reaction to being diagnosed as far as like starting those test processes and like getting that information? And was that like, so it was school led? It was a psychologist at the school?
Yes, it was. She didn't enjoy the whole process because there are a lot of tests involved, and it took several months really for all of this to conclude.
Mm,
So she didn't like that because she'd be taken out of, lessons and taken to a room where she has to do this test or that test. So she didn't enjoy the process. Um, it's funny. I need to ask her because I've never asked her how she's felt about being diagnosed with this, and so that's a really interesting question and probably a conversation I should have with her. But she seems to be taking it in a stride. But I do think that at least the diagnosis has made things make sense in her head a little bit. Like she can actually point to, well, she'll say to her sister, well, that's because of my ADHD. And so she now it's not necessarily a case that she'll say, oh, it's because I'm stupid or because I'm weird or whatever. She can see why she maybe acts and reacts to situations differently from other people.
yeah.
So I
Yeah.
would say, she's pretty accepting of it, and she has a pretty good attitude for the most part. But particularly when kids get to teenagers, Christina, they don't want to be different. They want to be the same as everyone else. So I
Yeah.
think she struggles with that aspect, even though, according to her school, which is a really large high school, apparently about 500 of the kids, that's about a quarter of the school, have IEPs for various reasons, and a lot of it is ADHD related.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The diagnosis piece, by the way, is
Yeah.
that's also something that can happen early, can happen later. And a lot of parents I know, including myself, like struggle with the idea of diagnosing your child. I know for me, there was a good portion of the year of 2017, which was when she was diagnosed, where I didn't want to call it autism and would get mad at people who use the word autism. I would correct them and say it's a developmental delay. We don't know that it's
Mm.
autism. And also I'm hesitant to even call it that because she might grow out of it. Like I had this like feeling about when there's a label on it, what does that mean? And I had a really wonderful mom who had had a child a couple years before me who had had a diagnosis around the same time for her kid. And she said to me, it's not about labeling your kid where, this is sticking with them forever and like this is their label. It's about receiving the resources that come with that label. And it's like you
Yeah.
talked about with your IEP, in order to get her what she needs to be successful in her classroom, she needs to have something that says she's a little different from everyone else. And even from an early age, like there's all these acronyms that you learn when you're a special needs parent. There's like the IPP, which is like when they're younger and you work with your regional center, and then there's
Yes.
like the
Yes.
IEP, and
Yes. It like
it's like a
progresses.
whole
Yeah.
language.
But so I hear you, and I know that I was reluctant to label it. And, I talked to my parents and they'd be reluctant to label it. But what I will say, and if there's any mums listening to this who have a gut feeling that there's something, a little off with their child, and that's not to say a child should act or be a certain way, but what I will say to you about getting a diagnosis is it opens up a whole new world of support, which is just not
Yeah.
available if you don't have the diagnosis. For example, the way that I explained why this IEP and why this diagnosis was a good thing to my daughter is because now at school, she gets extra time to turn in assignments. She gets extra time when she's taking tests. And it's
Yeah.
not because she's got an unfair advantage, and it's not because things have been made easy for her. It's because if she doesn't have those things in place, it's not a level playing field for her. She's at a huge disadvantage. Um, and the other thing that's really nice, they take the social emotional side of things very seriously at my daughter's school. So she now has a therapist at school that sees her once a week for half an hour.
Oh,
And
that's
so
amazing.
that's wonderful. And so without the diagnosis, none of this would have been in place, and it would have all have been on me to, maybe get support privately, but that still wouldn't have changed the situation at school. And for many kids with ADHD or who have some form of, learning difficulty. No matter what it is, school is an extremely hard place.
Yeah.
And I would dread to estimate the amount of kids and who are now adults who went through school thinking that they were
Yes.
stupid and that they just weren't academic. And it wasn't any of that. It's because they were undiagnosed with
Yeah.
something like ADHD, and they were never, ever given the support to be successful.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you mentioned that because when I went to have Stella diagnosed, I had
Hmm.
my own turmoil about it and like what I wanted to do and everything. But
Yeah.
then once I did get her diagnosed, there was some family members who were like, "Well, when I was growing up, there wasn't any autism at all, and like there was barely any children that had autism,
Yeah.
and like it must be something that we're taking in with eating or drinking or like something." A vaccine, like there was all these things that she was
Yeah.
pointing
Yes.
toward. And I'm
Yeah.
like, no, the reality is that a lot of times it went undiagnosed,
Oh,
especially
yeah.
in girls. It's
Oh,
so
yeah.
unlikely to have diagnoses as a girl because we present differently.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and the reality is like I laugh because one of the biggest people in my life that was like, this is all a hoax. I'm like, how's your collection of small villages that you don't let anyone touch during
So
Christmas?
this is so funny
Ma'am.
you said that. Yes. Because,
Like, I
and I
just feel like
see,
it's funny because you can point to things like, hey, that's a little tistic, is what me and my husband say. That's
yeah,
a
that's
little
so funny.
tistic.
So listen, so it's so funny you're saying this because so going back to a point you made about everyone, that perhaps in prior generations, oh, we didn't have this in our
Yeah.
day. And you'll see memes on social media about it, like, oh, today this is, ADHD. In my day, you just got like the belt or whatever. And it's like,
Yeah.
no, because it was never diagnosed. People
Yeah.
would never, parents would never have even thought to have tried to have sought a diagnosis because they didn't know how to, and there was stigma, and it just wasn't socially acceptable in the way that it is now,
Yeah.
or socially. Do you know what I'm saying? There just wasn't the
Yeah.
resources. It was
There
it was
wasn't
a
the
non-thing.
resources,
Yeah.
there wasn't the knowledge, there wasn't the
Yes.
intervention,
Yes.
or even
And
if you did know
infrastructure.
something was different, there was also fear because, not
Mhm.
that long ago, if your child was thought to have a developmental disability, you might
Yeah.
find them at an asylum, or like locked up
Exactly.
in some
Yes.
way.
Yes.
And, the thing about it is that especially with the autism spectrum,
Mm.
um, there are such varying differences between kid to kid to kid. And there's some
Yes.
amazing, incredible minds out there that are autistic. And there's like
Yeah.
there's a lot of inventions that people don't
Oh,
know
yeah.
about that
Very,
are
very creative.
created.
Yes.
There's a
Yeah.
lot of women in
Yeah.
STEM that are autistic.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
just, it's bananas that people don't realize. And if you look backward, I'm sure that you'll remember a classmate who was like really fixated on something specific.
But
That
like
child was probably autistic.
I'm sure. And so it's that's yeah, I had this conversation, with the girls quite often. We'll be discussing someone, and the girls will even say, "Mum, I bet they have ADHD and they're not diagnosed." And I bet that too,
Yeah.
because now that I'm much more, genned up, for want of a better phrase, on this type of thing. Even myself, honestly, and we can discuss this on another episode because this is a whole different thing too. But I just wonder how many parents of autistic kids or kids with ADHD, maybe they have something that has not been diagnosed. I know certainly with
Yeah.
ADHD, there are a lot of adults that are getting diagnoses later in life, in adulthood,
Yeah.
and they always knew that there was something, but it was just not ever anything that anyone explored on their behalf. And now that they can see this
Yeah.
social change, and it's much more widely accepted and talked about, they're getting diagnoses at like 35, 45, or however old they are, and it's life changing for them.
Yeah, for a
It,
lot of reasons of
yes,
like just having
because
some
it's
like you
that
mentioned
I
earlier
can,
with your daughter, like
yeah.
something to point to and say that makes
Yeah.
sense now. Everything's clicking into place because I
Yeah, and
understand it.
for sure. And it's like, it's not because I'm stupid, and it's not because I can't do this. It's because of this. And so,
Yeah.
um, I know that initially a parent's reaction to a diagnosis of their child is probably horror, because they don't want them to be put in a box, and particularly
Yeah.
one that maybe has negative connotations, potentially. But I'm telling you from my experience that that actually has had the opposite effect for
Yeah.
me and our situation, because we now have help. And I'm telling you, I could not do this on my own. I am not
Yeah.
qualified in every single category that there is to handle this situation on my own.
We have had well, I say we, I,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
I've been navigating this for a really long time, and my
yeah.
husband, Alex, has really come in as a extra pair of hands. He goes to all the parent meetings, all the IEPs, all the stuff.
That's great.
But prior to that, it's been just kind of like my thing.
Yeah.
And without the intervention, I don't know what our lives would look like right now, because
Mhm.
when she was younger, I mean, she just didn't have any verbal skills. There was such terrible upsets, and I didn't know why. And then there was sensory issues that I wasn't aware of, and I
Yes.
just
Yeah.
remember feeling so embarrassed all the time, because, like,
Oh.
there's one specific trip before she got diagnosed where we went to the zoo with a bunch of other moms, and we all drove together in this like
Mhm.
minivan, and there was like maybe three of us, and then our kids that were all similar aged. And we got there, and my child refused to walk past the doors and would not engage with the zoo at all, and only wanted to be at this playground and like go down the same slide over and over for hours.
Oh.
And I thought to myself, is this ever going to get better? Like, am I always going to be othered? Am I always going to be in this
Yeah.
space?
Yeah.
And because of intervention, because of the label, I have had amazing professionals come in and give me
Mhm.
tools and give me ways to interact with my child and ways to grow and understanding her. She's unique, not good, not bad, just different. And we now can have conversations. And it's like, I think there's also something really special about parents of neurodiverse children when they do stuff that seems normal for other people. You get
Yes.
so excited about stuff. Like this year, for instance, yesterday we went and visited Santa. So we're recording this in December.
Yeah.
Um, we went and visited Santa, and previous years she would either not interact at all with Santa, or we put her on her lap and she was like trying to get off. Like, she didn't interact with him much at all, and let alone talking. And she goes up to Santa, and she sits on his lap, and she goes, "Dear Santa." And I said, "Oh, she wants to let you know, Santa, that she wrote you a letter." And he's like, "Oh,
Oh.
ho, 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 I'll have to
Oh.
read that at the North Pole." And she's just like, like all excited, like he's going to read her letter. And then he hands her this candy cane, and she looks at me and says, "Candy cane from Santa." And I'm thinking to myself, I wish I could zoom back to that mom who, at 4 years old, when I had a 4-year-old and she was losing it at Target, freaking out, and like everybody was staring at me, that, hey, it's going to get better. Keep working at it. Like, eventually you'll get to a place where you can have a meaningful conversation with her and understand how she's feeling and let her lead the way. And like, without that diagnosis, like, none of that happens.
So I love what you just said about celebrating the little wins. So things that are just so normal for other kids and other parents and other families,
Yeah.
I don't take for granted. So, being able to get somewhere on time, doing well in a test at school, doing things that other people just think are normal. I really praise those things, because even so we're talking about my teenage daughter, so she's obviously older than Stella, but she's also started to be able to not be as reactive, particularly when she's dealing with stressful situations, or a sister. And so if she handles the situation in a mature way, that's fantastic. I really praise her
Yeah.
for that. Um, because I'm also aware that, my other daughter doesn't necessarily struggle with the same things. And so I don't want it to be a her versus, her situation where, oh, one of them's so clever and she can do everything so easily. And then the other feels that, she's never going to be good enough, because that's not true. They both have their qualities. So that's a difficult balance to strike, actually. So I really do make a point of praising my older daughter when she does things that maybe other people would just think well normal, like, oh hey, yeah, well, wow, so what's the what's the big deal here? Well, I know what effort and, you know,
Yeah. You
hard
know what's
work I've
behind
put into.
that.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that was nice to hear you say that, because I experienced that too. um
Yeah. It's great
yeah.
that you mentioned your other daughter because I have, it's been interesting about having that diagnosis with Stella so early and having someone point out like the differences so
Uh-huh.
early as I have now a 15-month-old child. And this was around the time that that person was in my house. And they
Oh
are so different. And I know
yeah,
children are different in
yeah,
general,
they are.
but developmentally, she is doing things that are wild to me.
Oh
And it's really fun to watch, but I have to watch myself, like you just mentioned,
yes, you
because
do that.
I say stuff, and then my husband's great about being like, "Hey, little ears, like let's kind of tone that down a
Oh,
little bit,"
that's
because I'll
great
say
that
things
you're
like,
showing them.
"Do you see how she's interacting with me? She's looking upward when she's reading the book and like looking for my reaction." And like then
Mm,
wanting to like see me and have me interact with that book with
mhm,
her because her sister when she was younger at that age if she was playing with a book wanted to control the pages and wanted nothing to do with me. She wanted me to
mhm,
be away from her completely. She didn't want me
mhm.
to engage with her. She wouldn't engage with me unless she needed something.
Yeah,
And I thought
yeah.
to myself, what an easy baby. And then later on I was like, oh, okay, no, you're supposed to be wanting to interact with me. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, I would definitely say that it's something to watch out for. I'm glad you're aware of it already, because
Yeah,
you don't want that animosity to build between them. The other thing is my younger daughter, I think the diagnosis has actually helped her be a little more empathetic to her older sister. So it's not
definitely.
just that, she's been a pain or whatever. This is why. And so I do remind my younger daughter, gotta remember. And she'll say, yeah, I know, I know. And actually, I think she said to me that this has made her a little more empathetic to her friends and stuff. She can see
Yeah.
now other people at school, they may not be diagnosed, but she can see there's something going on and she's more empathetic towards them.
Yeah, no, that's incredible, and I think that, children who have a different abled person in their home,
Yeah,
they have a different level of empathy that comes with that, and I think it's important to talk about stuff in a way that they are able to see, the good and,
yeah.
able to convey that. We talk about it a lot at our house,
We
and
we
Rennie's
do
not
too.
yeah, she's not able to, like, comprehend just yet 'cause she's a baby,
Yeah.
but,
Yeah.
like, we
Yeah.
have books,
Mhm.
talking to Stella about her own diagnosis has been its own thing.
Mhm.
And we have leaned heavily. Sesame Street has this great character named Julia, and
Oh.
she's an autistic puppet that lives on Sesame
Oh,
Street.
yes. I haven't watched it, but I've heard about Julia. Yeah.
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 Yeah, and so we have some books about Julia, and then, the way the books explain it, they'll be like, "Julia loves music, and she loves the swings, and Julia is autistic." And I'll say, "Oh, what about Julia is similar to you?" And she'll like, "I like swings." I'm like, "That is true." Like
Oh,
and
that's
so we
so
try to, like,
sweet.
let her know, and so it's
Yeah.
funny because she was saying for a while, "I'm artistic," and I was like,
Oh, you
"Yeah,
are
both."
autistic.
Both, you are
Yeah,
autistic and
as the
artistic.
French would say, "Les 2." You're both. That's so
But yeah, we talk
sweet.
about it a lot where it's like I want her to know that things are different for her, but
Mhm.
not bad. It's just not the same as everyone. It's things are not good or bad. It's just is. And,
Yeah,
there are different types of people and we use it in that kind of connotation of like there are people that wear glasses, there are people that don't. There are people that use wheelchairs, there are people that don't. No one's good or bad. It just
yeah,
is.
yeah. I love that. And actually, I'm thinking you mentioned Alex earlier, your husband, and how
Yeah.
he reacts to this. I think going back to the diagnosis thing, that's made my husband understand the situation a little more. So maybe prior to that, he would have got very irritated by certain behavior. And I think now he recognizes that, okay, it's not because she's been deliberately difficult or whatever, it's because of this. So I do think that that has helped him to be a little more empathetic to the situation.
Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
this episode started out just wanting to talk about how it affects our day to day, but I think it ended
Uh-huh.
with kind of the diagnosis piece and how
Yeah.
powerful that can be. And
Yeah.
like, so if you're someone who has a child that is different ability or on the spectrum, share
Mhm.
a little bit about maybe your diagnostic journey, diagnostic, um, and a little bit about your child. We'd love to know them a little bit. And
Yes.
then if you're someone who has a child or knows someone that has a child that is doing some of the stuff that we mentioned,
Mm.
it's worth a conversation with a trained professional of like, hey, let's just check this out, because the worst that's going to happen is, that they say the worst is going to be like, there's two outcomes. Or either they're going to say, yes, that's what's going on here, or they're
Mm.
going to say, no, it's not. And either way, you're going to have a clear answer and a clear path forward.
Mhm. And listen, why don't we share some useful resources, Christina? Because
Yeah.
sometimes, you don't know where to start. I was lucky
Yeah.
that my daughter's school was really supportive, but a lot of the time it is down to the parent to really spearhead this. So we'll share some
Yeah.
resources with you. So as Christina said, please feel free to tap into those. And if you I think as mums, we know deep down, we know our children, so we know
Yeah.
if there's something that maybe we need to look into further. So I would just like anyone listening to this to just take away that it's not as scary as it seems. And if, like Christina said, you do get a diagnosis for whatever that may be, there is so much support for you out there. You do not need to deal with this on your own. So that would be what I would love people to take away from this. And that brings us to the end of another episode of the Momversation Club.
And if you've enjoyed today's show, which we hope you have, don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a review. Your support helps us reach even more moms and build a stronger village.
And remember, we're here for you. And together, I promise, we'll find out where the F that village is at.
See you next time.
Bye.